Welcome to the road to 1 million US dollars, and let's get right into the Bitcoin chart for today, starting on this 1 hour time frame for Bitcoin. And after I cover this short term, I'm going to move to higher and higher time frames. So first of all, since yesterday's video, guys, we have confirmed this bearish divergence in the charts, which is when you have higher highs in the Bitcoin price and lower highs in the RSI momentum indicator. In the case that you don't know, typically a bearish divergence plays out either in the form of some choppy sideways price action or potentially some bearish momentum. So far, we have seen a little bit of bearish momentum here, but nothing too crazy yet. However, there is a level of support that we should keep an eye on, which is around this 14K level for Bitcoin. This is a very important level in the short term because if we end up breaking through this, likely we are falling to this next level of support below, sitting at about 113.5. And the reason I'm talking about 113.5 is because we have seen some previous support being found here in the past. And even if I zoom a little bit further out, we have some resistance here as well. Although, of course, we are just talking about some short-term moves for Bitcoin. Now, something that you could look for in this immediate short term is to see if we are going to break this descending line of resistance. Because if we break through this, we would also be breaking through this Fibonacci level sitting at about 114.4K. Now, at that point, if you are a leverage trader, it might be interesting to look for some kind of move up to perhaps this Fibonacci golden pocket sitting at around 114.9K. Keep in mind that there are some levels of resistance that should not be ignored. For example, 114.6 and even 114.7 as well. And of course, if we see some kind of rejection earlier on, the most important level to pay attention to is once again at around that 114K level. Breaking through that would be very bad for Bitcoin in the short term. Moving on to the 1 day time frame for Bitcoin. So we are moving away from the immediate short term right now. And notice how right here we once again have a confirmed bearish divergence in the charts, which is when you have a higher high in the Bitcoin price and lower highs in the RSI momentum indicator. Now, as I told you earlier in this video, this typically plays out either in the form of some choppy sideways price action or some bearish momentum. And so far, we have definitely seen bearish momentum since confirming this. And notice how right now we are actually rejecting from this level of resistance that I talked about in yesterday's video, sitting from 115.5 all the way up to 116.5K. Therefore, right now on this 1 day time frame, the next big level of support to the downside is already sitting from 112 all the way down to 110K in the Bitcoin price. On this 1 day time frame, I am still leaning a bit more bearish so long as we are trading below this descending trend line in the RSI momentum indicator. Once we see a break of this descending trend line, guys, you will start to see me look for another big move to the upside for Bitcoin. But so long as we are below it, I am technically leaning more bearish on Bitcoin, especially so long as we are trading below this important level of resistance that I just showed you. Now, keep in mind that there is a difference between the different time frames. So obviously, if I'm doing analysis on the 30-minute or 1 hour time frame, that could be very different than this 1 day or even 2 day time frame analysis. So moving on to the 2 day time frame then, once again, here we have that bull flag pattern, which broke out at about 108K. Price target is still set at 126K in the Bitcoin price. However, as I have been saying over and over again, personally, in my trades, I am not still looking for this move to be reached. In fact, I am actually more focused on the lower time frames until I get a very clear setup for a swing trade. Because notice how right here we have a bunch of resistance and right here we have a bunch of support. We also just broke this ascending trend line. So in fact, the best time to be shorting is when we actually confirm this breakdown below this ascending trend line and not after you have already seen most of this price action here, because entering into your swing short position here would actually be quite late in comparison to when we are first breaking down below that ascending trend line here. So once again, that is why it makes more sense to be trading on these lower time frames right now, or wait for a actual good setup for some kind of long position or some kind of short position once again. Like for example, if we get here and it's extremely overbought or something like that, you might want to take some kind of short position here with a stop above the previous highs. If it is looking like this is going to top here at that time, of course, we cannot predict this ahead of time. Or for example, if we get some kind of big pullback and right here, we're in deep oversold territory, we're also in this big level of support. Maybe we have bullish divergences showing up on the lower time frames, or it could even be here, of course. But then it makes sense to be looking for some kind of swing back to the upside after we break this descending trend line, instead of just opening up some kind of swing trade as we're in the middle of this range here. So hopefully that makes sense, and that also explains why I am focused on these lower time frames at the moment. Moving on to the Bitcoin liquidation heat map. First of all, on this 48-hour time frame, notice how right now we have liquidity to the upside and to the downside. So most of the liquidity to the downside is sitting at 113.8 and even 113.5, around that short-term level of support that I showed you. And this level of liquidity to the upside is already sitting at 115.8K. So the downside liquidity is sitting right here, and the upside liquidity is sitting right here above these previous highs. If I zoom out to this 1 week Bitcoin liquidation heat map, most of the liquidity is to the upside, sitting at 117 and even as high as 120K. This is, of course, also because we just saw a decent size move to the downside that we haven't fully retraced, so it makes sense that all of this liquidity is here. But more importantly, overnight, we have just taken out this big level of liquidity here. And lastly, if I zoom out to this 3-month time frame for the Bitcoin liquidation heat map, notice how right here to the downside, there is basically no liquidity left because we have already taken all of that out, and there are barely any long positions that have been opened up with their liquidity right here after we got this big low. So the first big level of liquidity sitting at 111.5K. But as always, we cannot forget about this liquidity to the upside, because this is completely leaving the door open for Bitcoin to get another move to the upside at some point in the future. So for now, on this Bitcoin liquidation heat map, it makes sense to not be too bullish and not be too bearish on Bitcoin, because we're basically in the middle of this big move to the downside. Therefore, just focus on scalping the lower time frames and we'll take it from there. Either way, this has been today's market update. Thank you very much for watching once again, and I will see you tomorrow in the next one.